that pharmaceutical companies have actively used these extensive financial ties to shape practice and ideology within the mental health field, driving up prescription rates as a consequence, this should surprise no one. But the extent to which such companies have promoted increased prescribing by corrupt means is still not fully appreciated. So I'd like to focus very briefly on this issue now by drawing upon a case study. And by the way, I've just got about 10 minutes left before we can finally have our Q&A. But I just want to focus on a case study because I think it's quite illustrative of some of the problems we encounter in this area. In May 2000, Dr. Charles Schultz, a psychiatrist at the very height of his powers, walks up to a podium at the annual meeting of the American Psychiatric Association and announces a breakthrough in antipsychotic drug research. The breakthrough amounts to the development of a new drug that has, quote, dramatic benefits over its competitors. Its name is Seroquel, and because of its superiority, quote, patients must receive these medications first. 2 months before this commanding announcement was made at the APA and to the national media, the pharmaceutical company that manufactures Seroquel, AstraZeneca, was in disarray. They had just discovered that further research into Seroquel had revealed that the drug was far less effective than its arch-rival drug, a drug called Haldol. The document containing this finding was being circulated among senior staff at the company who were now not quite sure what to do. An internal email written at the time and later released by the company during litigation captures the mood very well. So this is the email going around. Jeff and Mike, here's the analyses I got from Emma. I've also attached a message I sent to her yesterday asking for clarification. The data don't look good. In fact, I don't know how we can get a paper out of this. My guess is that we all, including Schultz, saw the good stuff and then thought further analyses would be supportive and that the paper was in order. But what seems to be the case is that we were highlighting only the good stuff and that our own analysis now supports the view out there that we are less effective than Haldol and our competitors. Once you've had a chance to digest this, let's get together or teleconference and discuss where to go from here. We need to do this quickly because Schultz needs to get a draft ready for the APA and he needs any additional analyses we can give him well before then. So this is the company thinking, what we're going to do. And look at the relationship between Schultz, the psychiatrist who's going to present it as an independent academic at an APA academic conference. Look at the relationship between him and the company here. So in this email, the publications manager at AstraZeneca casts about for a solution. He knows the research into Seroquel doesn't look good. Yet he also realizes that Schultz has to present a paper on Seroquel at the American Psychiatric Association's meeting in 2 months' time. If Schultz reports the negative data, the drug is presumably doomed. A way out is needed and fast. So what does the company do? How in just 2 months does it move from privately despairing over the failings of Seroquel to making a public declaration about its exceptional advantages? Does the company rapidly undertake a new study that finally secures Seroquel's superiority? Does it reanalyze the old data only to discover that its previous negative interpretation was wrong? The company does neither. There is no time. And even if there were time, the existing data is definitive. The drug is weaker than its competitors in many areas. That, it seems, is plain for all to see. At this point, you'd probably expect the company to cut its losses and with regret to publish the whole truth. But the company does not take that route. Presumably there's too much money at stake. And anyway, perhaps there's another way out. Sure, it's not an ideal route to take or even an honest one, but given the money that could be lost, it has to be worth a go. The company therefore opts for a strategy known in drug research as cherry picking. In other words, it picks and publishes the data that makes the drug look effective while leaving aside the data that does not. And this was the solution that AstraZeneca opted for in early 2000. Rather than admitting that after a year on Seroquel, patients suffered more relapses and worse ratings on various symptom scales than patients on Haldol, not to mention gaining an average of 5 kilograms in weight, which put them at an increased risk of diabetes, the company rather honed in on one shred of positive data about the drug faring slightly better on some measures of cognitive functioning. And it was on the basis of these data that public claims were made that Seroquel has, quote, greater efficacy than Haldol, a fact hopefully leading physicians to, quote, better understand the dramatic benefits of newer medications like Seroquel. The company had favoured the practice of cherry-picking for some time. Indeed, in the following email, again internal, again released during litigation, we hear how cherry-picking had been used in a previously buried trial called Trial 15. Again, going among the senior echelons of the company. Please allow me to join into the fray. There has been a precedent set regarding cherry-picking of data. This would be the recent Veligan presentations of cognitive functioning data from Trial 15, one of the buried trials. Thus far, I'm not aware of any repercussions regarding interest in the unreported data. That does not mean that we should continue to advocate this practice. There is growing pressure from outside the industry to provide all data resulting from clinical trials conducted by the industry. Thus far, we have buried trials 15, 31, 56, and now considering Costa. The largest issue is how do we face the outside world when they begin to criticize us for suppressing data? One could say that our competitors indulge in this practice. However, until now, I believe we have been looked upon by the outside world favorably with regard to ethical behavior. We must decide if we wish to continue to enjoy this distinction. Obviously, AstraZeneca decides not to plunge for the ethical option. Rather, it continues to risk its reputation and the health of patients by cherry-picking the positive data and burying the negative data to sell the advantages of Seroquel over Haldol. This finally backfired in 2010 when so many people taking Seroquel were suffering from such awful side effects that about 18,000 of them were officially claiming that the company had lied about the risks of the drug. These claims were finally vindicated in 2010 when AstraZeneca paid out $125 million to settle a class action out of court for defrauding the public. But you know, this isn't an outlier. Let me very quickly run through a few other case studies just to let you know before we finish. I'm running out of time. GlaxoSmithKline, its drug Paxil Seroxat, did 3 trials. One trial showed mixed results. Another trial showed that it was no more effective than a placebo, and trial 3 suggested the placebo was actually more effective with certain children. But this is children, by the way. So the company published only the most positive study, publicly declaring that the drug is effective for major depression in children. Company officials actively suppressed negative results from one study because, as they said, it would be commercially unacceptable to include a statement that the efficacy had not been demonstrated, as this would undermine the profile of paroxetine. There was a lawsuit filed against GlaxoSmithKline in 2004. GSK settled out of court 2 months later when the company paid $2.5 million for charges of consumer fraud, a meagre sum considering that GlaxoSmithKline made $4.97 billion in worldwide sales from the drug in 2003 alone. By the way, this is a drug for children. Forest Laboratories, charged by the US Justice Department for defrauding the government of millions of dollars for hiding a clinical study showing that their antidepressants, Celexa and Lexapro, were not effective in children and might even pose dangerous risks to them. At worst, these risks included causing some children to become suicidal. Prosecutors said that by failing to disclose the negative results, which they buried, Forest had kept crucial information hidden from physicians and from the wider public, preventing them from having all the information they require to make right treatment decisions for young children. Pfizer, reboxetine, marketed as Adronax by the drug giant, our friend Pfizer again, is no more effective at countering major depression than a placebo sugar pill. Pfizer withheld negative trials from publication on 74% of the patients the article surveyed were actually left unpublished. Authors concluded in the BMJ that if the excluded data had been included, the evidence would have showed that the risks of taking the drug far exceeded the benefits. Yet reboxetine has been approved for marketing in many European countries since 1997 and is still being taken by thousands of patients in the UK today. Finally, New England Journal of Medicine 2008, this article reviewed 70 of the major clinical trials into antidepressant, and it asked how many of these trials had been published. The answer, 38 showed positive results for antidepressants, slightly better outcomes compared to placebos. And nearly every one of these positive studies had been published by the companies that undertook them. 36 studies actually showed negative results. Out of these, a full 22 had been buried, that is, never published. 11 had been published in a way to convey a positive outcome, and only 3 have been published accurately. Conclusion, a total of 33 negative studies had either been buried or manipulated to convey a positive outcome. So to bring things to a conclusion, one final paragraph. Of course, where psychopharmaceuticals genuinely help people, they may have some currency. However, research has also shown that the safety and efficacy of psychiatric drugs in particular has been exaggerated by both industry and those professionals whom industry funds, and that growing consumption of such drugs has been less driven by their clinical success than by good marketing concealing bad science, the manipulation and burying of negative clinical trials data, lax medicines regulation, and I've said nothing about that today, but that's a whole other story, the poor provision for non-drug alternatives, strong financial allegiances between industry and psychiatry, and the aggressive medicalization of everyday human distress. In short, the argument that psychopharmaceutical promotion has placed sufferers' needs before those of its shareholders is very, very difficult to substantiate. And I will leave the presentation there, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have. Thank you.